with law enforcement locally, regionally, throughout the entire country. This is kind of a pretty large discussion. What are your feelings on, especially with what's been going on in Geneva? What's your feeling on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we hear a lot all the time, community policing, that's the right thing to do. But I think if we just thought about it, you know, what is policing actually about, we would understand that community policing is not meant to be some new, unique way of approaching it. That's supposed to be what's going on, right? Like, you hire people who enforce and maintain your community standards. So for me, the discussion that's going on in Geneva has been really interesting, because during the last council meeting, which was actually a hearing about the budget, several people got up and wanted to see the budget for police training increased, and specifically training that has been vetted and kind of nationally approved and recommended to deal with issues of implicit bias. So particularly for people who are working in a community that's more diverse, just making sure that the officers are kind of in tune with what's going on in the community, and kind of examining what they bring to the job and how that might affect how they carry out the job. So, I mean, that seems reasonable. I mean, who wouldn't want more training? Then, and if you don't want more training, that's a problem, right? If anyone who raises their hand that they don't want more training,
kind of says something.
Yes, that's a concern. So, but then the other piece of that was this kind of citizens review or citizens accountability board, which I admit I have always thought was a good idea, but have never found that there's been much support for. And I'm not sure why there is that disconnect, because my question is, what do you have to lose? What do you have to lose if you engage the community in a more connected, open way in what's going on at the police department? So, I don't know. I mean, you see that Geneva's done that Citizens Police Academy thing, Citizens Academy, where people come in and over a series of weeks they learn kind of the inner workings of the police department, and they get to interact with the officers and talk about what's going on. That's been great. I mean, officers and participants have expressed that it's been really eye-opening. Everybody learned something. So formalizing that and making something where there's actually an accountability function so that people participate in oversight of the department, I think is an excellent idea. I mean, I don't see what the pushback is. I think immediately people say, well, if you start something like that, you must be saying the police are doing something wrong. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think you can just say, this is actually a good way to do things, and we're going to start doing it that way without pointing the finger at anybody. But, you know, so I find that thing, like, well, you don't like the police, the way they're doing their job. I think that's kind of the straw man argument. It doesn't matter whether anybody likes what they're doing or not. The point is, this makes sense. So, I don't know. Council hasn't responded to it yet. And this week they start, in fact, tonight, they'll start their budget workshops to entertain this proposal, and I'm interested to see if they will add money for this, because if it actually matters to them as much as they say it does, if the police matter to them more than just during election year, then they should fund this.
Now, I guess I kind of look at the whole having an oversight committee as an insurance policy as well for those who are actually in law enforcement.
Right.
Because there is this sort of active distrust that exists with law enforcement, unfortunately. I think that's kind of the tone across the board, and whether it's right or wrong or whether there is actual evidence to support it, and this varies community by community. I'm speaking very generally right now.
Right.
I think just having another layer of just safeguards to make sure that all the right things are happening, all the T's are being crossed and I's dotted, it doesn't hurt.
Right.
And I think that's kind of where, you know, how much is it going to cost the city to have an oversight committee, a volunteer oversight committee? How much does it cost any community to have? You seek volunteers, you get those volunteers, you train them, you get them some experience with just sort of interacting with the kind of material they'd be interacting with.
Right.
You know, that's when I think I'm always really worried when these big kind of like philosophical discussions happen alongside something like budget season.
Yeah.
Because there's no reason why something like this has to even take place near the debate around a budget, regardless of what, you know, it doesn't matter how or what you're trying to accomplish. If you can look at or figure out a way, there are a lot of smart people in Geneva, using Geneva as an example. If it were something that were going to cost the city a little bit of money, I'm sure there are ways that they could figure out to sort of ease that dollar burden. So to me, I get really skeptical when you start introducing things like budget or elections into what really should be a pretty black and white discussion about, you know, do we want to have these safeguards in place so that everyone is covered from the public? And this really, to me, given the tone of the discussion across the entire U.S., I'm not really sure how else you would go about, you talk about training. I'm not really sure that training does the trick. You can train someone until they are absolute experts in a topic. But if you have that planted seed of distrust that's already there, you're not going to, that's not going to change what a random member of the public thinks about that, you know, preconceived notions. You have bias, so many different things come into that whole discussion. So I think really training is part of it, but I think having representatives of the public be part of the process, be part of whether it's the complaint process or even just a review of, you know, monthly activity, something as simple as that to kind of show people what law enforcement is dealing with on a day in and day out basis. Well,
I mean, you could think about it as training for the community as well, because when people get in there and are able to take a close look, like you said, people in Geneva are smart, right? So you'll be able to separate pretty quickly what some actual challenges are from things that are not challenges, right? Things that are being done well. And I think it's important for people to be able to communicate that message. And, you know, let's assume I'm a member of the police department. It'd be really easy for me to say, hey, I'm really good at this. I'm doing this well. Here's what's going on. It's not the same. Like you said, if there's even a seed of distrust, which certainly over the past few months we've seen, unfortunately, has come to bear, and rightfully so based on the actions of certain people, you really need to take a disposition, if you care about restoring trust, of saying, hey, nothing to hide, follow me around, take a look at what I'm doing, check up on me. Like this, that will over time rebuild the trust. But when people say, well, I didn't do anything wrong, or everything's fine here, and just take my word for it, and actually here are 4 things I'm doing that are really well, like, see, it doesn't go over the same way as this kind of radical transparency that's just like, sure, yeah, come take a look, be part of it. And I think that would serve everybody a lot better.
So, of course, this is one of those things where this is another one of those problems where it's not going to be corrected or fixed in, you know, the blink of an eye.
Right.
And I think this is another one of those areas where people on both sides of the issue need to understand that a solution is, while you may be able to start the process of solving, isn't going to be solved for many years. It's going to take years to rebuild the trust that has been lost in, and not just Geneva. I'm saying broadly across the board.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think
because
that's fair.
The problem is you don't have people, and I think this goes back to the kind of news consumption side of it. People aren't just impacted or affected by what's happening in their own backyard. They're also affected by what they're hearing is happening in Buffalo and Schenectady and these, you know,
that's right.
Insert the name of the community here. And that's it's going to be a slow process, but probably one that could be started to address here locally sooner than later, or should be anyway.
Yeah.
So our next topic up, We have been trying to fit this one into a podcast now for
Yeah.